The lawyer stood by the thesis of homicide in legitimate defence of honour, which was upheld by the court of good faith, and the twins declared at the end of the trial that they would have done it again 1,000 times over for the same reason. It was they who gave a hint of the direction of the defence would take as soon as they surrendered to their church a few minutes after the crime. They burst panting into the parish house, closely pursued by a group of roused-up Arabs, and they laid the knives with clean blades on Father Amado's desk. Both were exhausted from the barbarous work of death, and their clothes and arms were soaked, and their faces smeared with sweat and still living blood. But the priest recalled the surrender as an act of great dignity. I'm just going to stop there for a second, guys, to go back. The first sentence in itself, calling it a legitimate defence of honour, we think back to what times were like here in 1950s, that men were actually considered to be honourable people by killing someone in defence of their family or their honour or their little sister's honour. It just seems quite ridiculous at that time. They're stating that they would have done it again 1,000 times over for the same reason. This was someone who was a friend of theirs at the time as well. When they come in to the parish church, they put the knives down, the clean blades. They've actually already wiped them clean. Do they wipe themselves clean? No. Their clothes, their arms are still soaked and smeared in blood and sweat. And of course, the actual priest says themselves that they came in and did it with great dignity. How outrageous does that seem? Have a look at the contradiction here at the top of page 49 in terms of the barbarous work. And then if we go back down, we killed him openly, but we're innocent. Two things so contradictory of one another, okay? We killed him openly, so we did it, but we're innocent. But we didn't do it. Like, it just doesn't make any sense here, guys. So a lot to unpack there. Let me keep reading. Perhaps before God, said Father Amador. Before God and before men, Pablo Vicario said, it was a matter of honour. Another really good thing to highlight there, guys. Furthermore, with the reconstruction of the facts, they had feigned a much more inclement bloodthirstiness than really was true, to such an extreme that it was necessary to use public funds to repair the main door of Clotilda Lanario's house, which was all chipped with knife thrusts. Imagine here the impact and I guess the brutality here of this murder, that they actually had to use the public money, so taxpayers' money, to fix this door. You can imagine how savage this killing was. In the Panicton, which is basically a prison, and I never know how to say this properly, Rayakasha, where they spent 3 years awaiting trial because they couldn't afford bail, the older prisoners remembered them for their good character and sociability, but they never noticed any indication of remorse in them. So basically meaning that people still actually consider and hold these people in high regard, but there's no remorse, there's no guilt or shame for what they've done. Still, the reality seemed to be that the Vicario brothers had done nothing right in line with killing Santiago Nassar right off and without any public spectacle, but had done much more than could be imagined for someone to stop them from killing them, and they failed. Really interesting point here, guys, that the boys are actually telling so many people in order for someone to actually try to stop them, because they believe that that them going out and saying they're going to kill Santiago is protecting and sort of like, you know, I guess protecting their sister's honour in just that mere threat of wanting to kill the man who did this. According to what they told me years later, they had begun by looking for him at Maria Alejandra, I never say her name right either, Alejandran, I don't know how, anyway, place, where they had been with him until 2 o'clock. The fact, like many others, was not reported in the brief. Actually, Santiago Nassar was no longer there at the time the twins said they went looking for him, because we'd left to do a round of serenades. But in any case, it wasn't certain that they'd gone. They never would have left here, Maria told me, and knowing her so well, I never doubted it. On the other hand, they went to wait for him at Clotilda Amenta's place, where they knew that almost everybody would stop except Santiago Nassar. So again, guys, so they knew that everyone was going to actually stop there except him. Okay, so sort of waiting at a place that perhaps he's never going to arrive at. It was the only place open, they declared to the investigator. Sooner or later, he would have come out, they told me, after they had been absolved. Still, everybody knew that the main door of Placida Linero's house was always barred on the inside, even during the daytime, and that Santiago Nassar always carried the keys to the back door with him. That was where he went in and got home. In fact, while the Vicario twins had been waiting for him for more than an hour on the other side, if he later left by the door on the square where he went to receive the bishop, it was for such an unforeseen reason that the investigator who drew up the brief never did understand it. There had never been a death more foretold. I want you to underline that, put a star next to it, do a couple of love hearts if you like. That quote is so important here. This conclusive view of the murder is illustrated. Sorry, can you pause for a second? All right, sorry about that, guys. So there had never been a death more foretold. So basically meaning that so many people knew that this was going to happen, but so few people actually did anything about it. We're going to learn actually in the next page, I think it's around 22 people that overheard him talking here. So why did no one do anything? If you're a psychology student, you've probably heard a little bit about the bystander effect here. I'm going to do a little activity for you guys next year or in 2024 about this, but it's just such an interesting thing about people and I guess their reasons as to why they choose to stay silent. They either think it's not their business or that someone else is going to do it for them. Anyway, let's get back to reading. So there had never been a death more foretold. After their sister revealed the name to them, the Vicario twins went to the bin in the pigsty where they kept their sacrificial tools and picked out the two best knives, one for quartering, 10 inches long by 2 and 1/2 inches wide, and the other for trimming, 7 inches long by 1.5 inches wide. They wrapped them in a rag and went to sharpen them at the meat market, where only a few stalls had begun to open. There weren't many customers that early, but 22 people declared that they had heard everything they said, and they all coincided in the impression that the only reason they had said it was for someone to hear them. So we look at the top here, guys. Really good to even look at sacrificial tools, okay? Really good quote to refer back to. Even just like the two worded quotes themselves, you can talk about how the author, sorry, I just had a mental block out there, how the author actually unpacks the length and I guess what these sacrificial tools actually look like in terms of how big they are, what are they usually used for, but they're just about to be used to kill Santiago Nassar. All right, Faustino Santos, a butcher friend, saw them come in at 3:20 when they had just opened up his innards table, and he couldn't understand why they were coming on a Monday and so early, and still in their dark wedding suits. He was accustomed to seeing them on Fridays, but a little later, and wearing the leather aprons they put on for slaughtering. I thought they were so drunk, Faustino Santos told me, that not only had they forgotten what time it was, but what day it was too. He reminded them that it was a Monday. Everybody knows that, you dope, Pablo Vicario answered him good-naturedly. We just came to sharpen our knives. They sharpened them on the grindstone, as they always did, Pedro holding the knives and turning them over on the stone, and Pablo working the crank. At the same time, they talked about the splendour of the wedding and with the other butchers. Some of them complained about not having gotten their share of cake in spite of their being working companions, and they promised to have them sent over later. Finally, they made the knives sing on the stone, and Pablo laid his beside the lamp so that the steel sparkled. Looking at this, guys, such a casual conversation with the other butchers about the night before, about the wedding. All the while, they're actually sharpening their knives again in order to kill someone. Really good quotes here in terms of sharpening. So got them so sharp that they sing on the stone and that they sparkled silver. We're going to kill Santiago Nassar, he said. Their reputation as good people was so well founded that no one paid any attention to them. We thought it was drunkards baloney, several butchers declared, the same as Victoria Guzman and so many others who saw them later. I was to ask the butchers sometime later whether or not the trade of slaughter didn't reveal a soul predisposed to killing a human being. Just pausing again here, guys. I love this quote here, or this little section here, talking about whether the trade of slaughter, so actually being some kind of butcher, we know that the twins actually kill a lot of pigs, does it predispose them to killing a human being, okay, if they're in such a trade already? Something to really think about there. All right, they protested. When you sacrifice a steer, you don't look into its eyes. One of them told me that he couldn't eat the flesh of an animal he had butchered. Another told me that he wouldn't be capable of sacrificing a cow if he'd known it before, much less if he's drunk its milk. I reminded them that the Vicario brothers sacrificed the same hogs they raised and that they were so familiar to them that they called them by their names. That's true, one of them replied, but remember that they didn't give them people's names by the names of flowers. I also actually find this a bit funny because they're talking about can you kill someone if you know them in terms of the animals, but they're also friends with Santiago and Nasa and
they're like drinking with him the
night
night before.
It doesn't make any sense.
And I find it quite contradictory, this section, to the previous sections and other people's opinions on the brothers, where they're like, oh, they're good-natured, they're this, they're that, they're honourable, they're to be admired. And here they're talking about how people can't possibly name the animals that they're going to slaughter. They can't know them that well. But these two brothers gave them names.
Yeah.
Even if they are the names of flowers, they still named them. So it's, I think it's just a bit of a contradiction to all the other accounts and how other people see the brothers.
Agreed. Faustino Santos was the only one who perceived a glimmer of truth in Pablo Vicario's threat, and he asked him jokingly why they had to kill Santiago Nassar, since there were so many other rich people who deserved dying first. Lol, I love that. Santiago Nassar knows why, Pedro Vicario answered him. Faustino Santos told me that he'd been doubtful still and that he reported it to a policeman. So again, thank you, Faustino, for trying to do the right thing. Hashtag Faustino forever. Who came by a little later to buy a pound of liver for the mayor's breakfast. The policeman, according to the brief, was named Leandro Pornoy, and he died the following year, gored in the jugular vein by a bull during the national holidays. So I was never able to talk to him, but Clotilda Amento confirmed for me that he was the first person in her store when the Vicario twins were already sitting and waiting. Clotilda Amento had just replaced her husband behind the counter. It was their usual system. The shop sold milk at dawn and provisions during the day and became a bar after 6 o'clock in the evening. Clotilda Amento would open at 3:30 in the morning. Her husband, the good Don Rogelio de la Flor, would take charge of the bar until closing time. But the night there had been so many stray customers from the wedding that he went to bed after 3 o'clock without closing, and Clotilda Manta was already up earlier than usual because she wanted to finish before the bishop arrived. The Vicario brothers came in at 4:10, and that time only things to eat were sold. But Clotilda Amento sold them a bottle of cane liquor, not only because of the high regard she had for them, but also because she was very grateful for the piece of wedding cake they had sent her. So again, guys, as Miss Grant was just sort of said before, these brothers, again, held in high regard by many people in society. They drank down the whole bottle in 2 long swigs, but they remained stolid. I think it's, yeah. They were stunned, Clotilda Amento told me, and they couldn't have got their blood pressure up even with lamp oil. Then they took off their cloth jackets, hung them carefully on the chair backs, and asked for another bottle. Their shirts were dirty with dried sweat and a one-day beard gave them a backwards look. That's right. They drank the second bottle more slowly, sitting down, looking insistently toward Placido Linero's house on the sidewalk across the way, where the windows were dark. The largest one, on the balcony, belonged to Santiago Nassar's bedroom. Pedro Vicario asked Clotilda Amento if she had seen any light in that window, and she answered him with no, but it seemed like a strange interest.
Did something happen to him? She asked. No, Pedro Vicario replied, just that we're looking for him to kill him. So again, so brazen, so open, they're just announcing to everyone that will listen that they're going to kill him. Oh, good highlighting. Thanks, computer. It was such a spontaneous answer that she couldn't believe she'd heard right. But she noticed that the twins were carrying 2 butcher knives wrapped in kitchen rags. And might a person know why you want to kill him so early in the morning? Odd phrase there, so early in the morning. Not that they're looking to kill him, but that they're looking to do it so early. He knows why, Pedro Vicario answered. Clotilda Amente examined them seriously. She knew them so well that she could tell them apart, especially ever since Pedro Vicario had come back from the army. They looked like 2 children, she told me, and that thought frightened her because she'd always felt that children are capable of everything. So she finished getting the jug of milk ready and went to wake her husband to tell him what was going on in the shop. Don Regalio de la Flor listened to her half awake. Don't be silly, he told her. Those 2 aren't about to kill anyone, much less somebody rich. So there's a bit of talk with Santiago Nassar that he's untouchable. Later on, there's the conspiracy. There's the thought going about the town that she'd named Santiago because she thought that he was untouchable. When Clotilda Armento returned to the store, the twins were chatting with Officer Leandro Pornoy, who was coming for the mare's milk. She didn't hear what they were talking about, but she supposed that they had told him something about their plans from the way he looked at the knives when he left. Colonel Lazaro Aponte had just gotten up a little before 4. He'd finished shaving when Officer Leandro Pornoy revealed the Vicario brothers' intentions to him. He'd settled so many fights between friends the night before, he was in no hurry for another one, so he just couldn't be bothered. He got dressed calmly, tied his bow tie several times until he had it perfect, and around his neck he hung the scapular of the Congregation of Mary to receive the bishop. So everyone's in a flurry for the bishop's arrival. When he breakfasted on fried liver, smothered with onion rings, his wife told him with great excitement that Beato San Roman had brought Angelo Vicario back home, but he didn't take it dramatically. Good Lord, he mocked. What will the bishop think? Nevertheless, before finishing breakfast, he remembered what the orderly had just told him, put the 2 bits of news together, and discovered immediately that they fit like 2 pieces of the puzzle. And then he went to the square, going along the street to the new dock where the houses were beginning to liven up for the bishop's arrival. I can remember with certainty that it was almost 5 o'clock and it was beginning to rain. So there's a lot in this text about the weather and people contradicting each other with their recounts of the weather, but something that they're all really, really specific on is the time. I've highlighted through a lot of the other readings all of the times because they're often really specific. Colonel Lazaro Aponte told me, along the way, 3 people stopped him to tell him secretly that the Vicario brothers were waiting for Santiago Nassar to kill him. So more people, it's becoming the gossip of the town. He found them in Clotilda Armente's store. When I saw them, I thought they were nothing but a pair of big bluffers, he told me with his personal logic, because they weren't as drunk as I thought. Nor did he interrogate them concerning their intentions, but took away their knives and sent them off to sleep. So he just thought that this was like childish ramblings. He was like, they're not going to do anything with this. He treated them with the same self-assurance with which he had just passed off his wife's alarm. Just imagine, he told them, what will the bishop say if he finds you in that state? They left. Clotilda Armento suffered another disappointment with the mayor's casual attitude. So she's emerging as someone who actually wants to do the right thing. Suffered another disappointment with the mayor's casual attitude because she thought he should have arrested the twins until the truth came out. Colonel Aponte showed her the knives as a final argument. Now they haven't got anything to kill anybody with, he said, which seems bizarre. Like, the town is full of butchers. They themselves kill pigs for a living. Like, of course they're going to be able to find some new knives. Now they haven't got anything to kill anybody with, he said. That's not why, said Clotilda Armente. It's to spare those poor boys from the horrible duty that's fallen upon them. So interesting there, her reason for wanting to stop them doesn't seem to be to save Santiago Nassar, but to save the boys themselves from their horrible duty that's fallen upon them. Because she'd sensed it, she was certain that the Vicario brothers were not as anxious to fulfill the sentence as to find someone who would do them the favour of stopping them. So again, here we've got that reiterated. Again, with Garcia Marquez's style, he's determinedly vague. He doesn't want us to have a correct or incorrect answer. He wants everyone to make up their own mind. And yeah, this is a sentence that's said a lot. But Colonel Aponte was at peace with his soul. "No one is arrested just on suspicion," he said. "Now, it's a matter of warning Santiago Nassar, and Happy New Year." Clotilda Armento would always remember that Colonel Aponte's chubby appearance brought on a certain pity in her, so someone that should inspire justice, someone that should be looked up to, is someone that she pities. But on the other hand, I remembered him as a happy man, although a little bit off because of the solitary spiritualist practices he had learned through the mails. His behaviour that Monday was the final proof of his silliness. So unusual words for someone that's quite high up in the community. He's silly, he's pitiful, he's seen as a bit of a joke here. The truth is that he didn't think of Santiago Nassar again until he saw him on the docks, and then he congratulated himself for having made the right decision. Well done.
What an idiot.
Yeah. The Vicario brothers had told their plans to more than a dozen people who had gone to buy milk. Again, how many people... Oh, God, the highlighting. How many people know about this, and yet very few do anything. And these had spread them all, gone to buy milk, and these had spread them all over before 6 o'clock. It seemed impossible to Clotilda Armento that they didn't know in the house across the way. She didn't think that Santiago Nassar was there, since she hadn't seen the bedroom light on, and she asked everyone she could to warn him when they saw him. She even sent word to Father Amador through the novice on duty, who came to buy milk for the nuns. So she is actually making a really decent effort, as much as she could, being bound to her job at the time and having to watch the shop, to try and get word to Santiago Nassar. Even though she thinks he's not home, even though she thinks maybe the brothers won't do it, even though she's told the mayor, even though she's done everything she possibly can, she's still trying to get word out to him. She sent the last urgent message after 4 o'clock, when she saw the lights on in the kitchen of Placido Linares' house. She sent the last urgent message to Victoria Guzman by the beggar woman who came by every day to ask for a little milk in the name of charity. When the bishop's boat bellowed, almost everybody was up to receive him, and there were very few of us who didn't know that the Vicario twins were waiting waiting for Santiago Nassar to kill him. And besides, the reasons were known down to the smallest detail.
Clotilda Armento hadn't finished dispensing her milk when the Vicario brothers returned with 2 other knives wrapped up in a newspaper. One was for quartering, with a strong rusty blade 12 inches long and 3 inches wide, which had been put together by Pedro Vicario with the metal from a marquetry saw at a time when German knives were no longer available because of the war. So they've come back with another lot of knives, and they know that it's their duty no matter what to complete this act. So they've gone and found another lot of knives ready to do that. The other one was shorter, but broad and curved. The investigator had made sketches of them in the brief, perhaps because he had trouble describing them, and all he ventured to say was that it looked like a miniature scimitar. It was with these knives that the crime was committed, and both were rudimentary and had seen a lot of use. Faustino Santos couldn't understand what had happened. They came to sharpen their knives a second time, he told me, and once more they shouted for people to hear that they were going to cut Santiago Nassar's guts out. So I thought they were kidding around, especially since I didn't pay any attention to the knives and thought they were the same ones. This time, however, Clotilda Armento noticed from the time she saw them enter that they didn't have the same determination as before. Actually, they'd had their first disagreement. Not only were they much more different inside than they looked on the outside, but in difficult emergencies, they showed opposite characters. We, their friends, had spotted it ever since grammar school. Pablo Vicario was 6 minutes older than his brother, and he was the more imaginative and resolute until adolescence. Pedro Vicario always seemed more sentimental to me, and by the same token, more authoritarian. So we're starting to get a bit more characterization of the twins. We had a little bit before, but there's more information about them as we go on. They presented themselves together for military service at the age of 20, and Pablo Vicario was excused in order to stay home and take care of the family. Pedro Vicario served for 11 months on police patrol. The army routine, aggravated by the fear of death, had matured his tendency to command and the habit of deciding for his brother. He also came back with a case of Sergeant's Blenneria, which is gonorrhea, that resisted the most brutal methods of military medicine, as well as the arsenic injections and permanganate purges of Dr. Dionyso Iguarian. Only in jail did they manage to cure it. We, his friends, agreed that Pablo Vicario had suddenly developed the strange dependence of a younger brother when Pedro Vicario returned with a barrack room soul and with the novel trick of lifting his shirt for anyone who wanted to see a bullet wound with seton on his left side. He even began to develop a range of feather only the great man's Blenneria that his brother wore like a war medal. So there's a really obvious difference here when it comes to the expectations in terms of sexuality. He's proud that he has this STI, whereas the women obviously have to be virtuous and hold on to their purity. Pedro Vicario, according to his own declaration, was the only one who made the decision to kill Santiago Nassar, and at first his brother only followed along. It's sort of like this little sibling rivalry that starts out between them as well, who decided to do what first. But he was also the one who considered his duty fulfilled when the mayor disarmed them, and then it was Pablo Vicario who assumed command. Neither of the two mentioned that disagreement in their separate statements to the investigator, but Pablo Vicario confirmed several times to me that it hadn't been easy for him to convince his brother about their final resolve. Maybe it was really nothing but a wave of panic, but the fact is that Pablo Vicario went into the pigsty alone to get the other two knives while his brother agonized, drop by drop, trying to urinate under the tamarind trees. My brother never knew what it was like, Pedro Vicario told me in our only interview. It was like pissing at ground glass. Pablo Vicario found him hugging the tree when he came back with the knives. He was in a cold sweat from the pain, he told me, and he tried to tell me to go on by myself because he was in no condition to kill anybody. He sat down on one of the carpenter's benches that they'd set up under the trees for the wedding lunch, and he dropped his pants down to his knees. He spent around half an hour changing the gauze he had his prick wrapped in, Pablo Vicario told me. Actually, he hadn't delayed more than 10 minutes, but it was something so difficult and so puzzling for Pablo Vicario that he interpreted it as some new trick on his brother's part to waste time until dawn. So he put the knife in his hand and dragged him off almost by force in search of their sister's lost honor. Great quote there. So we're seeing them as sort of like reluctant killers. They don't really want to do it, but they know it's their duty. There's no way out of this, he told him. It's as if it has already happened. Another great quote. They left by way of the pigeon gate with the knives unwrapped, pursued by the uproar of the dogs in the yard. It was beginning to get light. It wasn't raining, Pablo Vicario remembered. Just the opposite, Pedro recalled. There was a sea wind, and you could still count the stars with your fingers. The news had been so well spread by then that Hortensia Bate opened her door precisely as they were passing her house, and she was the first to weep for Santiago Nassar. I thought they had already killed him, she told me, because I saw the knives in the light from the street lamp, and it looked to me like they were dripping in blood. One of the few houses open on the misplaced street was that of Prudencia Coates, Pablo Vicario's fiancée. Whenever the twins passed by there at that time, and especially on Fridays when they were going to the market, they would go in to have their first cup of coffee. They pushed open the door to the courtyard, surrounded by the dogs, who recognized them in the half-light of dawn, and they greeted Prudencia Coates' mother in the kitchen. Coffee wasn't ready yet. We'll leave it for later, Pablo Vicario said. We're in a hurry now. I can imagine, my son, she said. Honor doesn't wait. So we've spoken about this before and probably later in the other texts about how the rest of the town thought that it was their duty to complete this killing as well. So sort of this acceptance on the town's part too, that they have to do it because it's an honor killing. But in any case, they waited, and then it was Pedro Vicario who thought his brother was wasting time on purpose. While they were drinking their coffee, Prudencia Coates came into the kitchen in full adolescent bloom, with a roll of newspaper to revive the fire in the stove. I knew what they were up to, she told me, and I didn't only agree, I never would have married him if he hadn't done what a man should do. So this societal expectation's really deeply ingrained in the town. Before leaving the kitchen, Pablo Vicario took two sections of newspaper from her and gave one to his brother to wrap the knives in. Prudencia Coates stood waiting in the kitchen until she saw them leave by the courtyard door, and she kept on waiting for 3 years without a moment of discouragement until Pablo Vicario got out of jail and became her husband for life. Take good care of yourselves, she told them. So Clotilda Menta had good reason when it seemed to her that the twins weren't as resolute as before, and she served them a bottle of rotgut rum with the hope of getting them dead drunk. That day, she told me, I realised just how alone we women are in the world. So she's sort of powerless as a woman. The only thing she can do is try to get them drunk so they maybe don't commit the murder. Pedro Vicario asked to borrow her husband's shaving implements, and she bought him the brush, the soap, and the hanging mirror, and the safety razor with a new blade, but he shaved with his butcher's knife. It's sort of like he's just putting on this show almost of sort of how masculine he can be. Clotilda Menta thought that was the height of machismo. He looked like a killer in the movies, she told me, but as he explained to me later, and it was true, in the army he'd learned to shave with a straight razor and couldn't do it any other way since. His brother, for his part, shaved in a more humble way, with Don Regulio de la Flor's borrowed safety razor. Finally, they drank the bottle in silence, very slowly, gazing with the boobish look of early risers at the dark window in the house across the way, while false customers buying milk they didn't need and asking for food items that didn't exist went in and out with the intention of seeing if it was true that they were waiting for Santiago Nassar to kill him. The Vicario brothers would not see that window light up. Santiago Nassar went into the house at 4:20, and he didn't have to turn on any light to reach his bedroom because the bulb on the stairway stayed lit through the night. He threw himself onto his bed in the darkness and with his clothes on, since he had only an hour in which to sleep, and that was how Victoria Guzman found him when she came up to wake him, so he could receive the bishop. We'd been together at Maria Alejandrina Cervantes's up until after 3, when she herself sent the musicians away and turned out the lights in the dancing courtyard so that her pleasurable mulatto girls could go to bed themselves and get some rest. They'd been working without cease for 3 days, first taking care of the guests of honour in secret, then turned loose with open doors for those of us still unsated by the wedding bash. Maria Alejandrina Cervantes, about whom we used to say that she would only go to sleep once and that it would be to die, was the most elegant and most tender woman I've ever known, and the most serviceable in bed, but she was also the most strict. She'd been born and reared here, and here she lived in a house with open doors, with several rooms for rent, and an enormous courtyard for dancing with lantern gourds bought in the Chinese bazaars of Paramaribo. It was she who did away with my generation's virginity. It's really interesting that she's so well respected, especially by the men in this town, considering obviously her job and the business she owns. She taught us more than we would have learned, but she taught us above all that there was no place in life sadder than an empty bed. Santiago Nassar lost his senses the first time he saw her. I warned him. A falcon who chases a warlike crane can only hope for a life of pain. Another great quote there. But he didn't listen to me, dazzled by Maria Alejandrina Cervantes' illusionary calls. She was his mad passion, his mistress of tears at the age of 15, until Ibrahim Nassar drove him out of the bed with a whip and shut him up for more than a year on the divine face. Ever since then, they were still linked by a serious affection, but without the disorder of love, and she had so much respect for him that she never again went to bed with anyone if he was present. So again, an interesting word attached to the word love, like we've seen in previous chapters, the disorder of love. During those last vacations, she would send us off early with the pretext that she was tired, but she left the door unbarred and with a lamp lighted in the hall so I could come in secretly. Santiago Nassar had an almost magical talent for disguises, and his favourite sport was to confuse the identities of the mulatto girls. He would rifle the wardrobe of some to disguise the others, so that they all ended up feeling different from themselves and like the ones they weren't. So it's almost playful here, but it's sort of manipulating the girls as well. It shows that he's got this sort of strange side to him where he gets this pleasure from sort of tricking them. On a certain occasion, one of them found herself repeated in another with such exactness that she had a crying attack. I felt like I'd stepped out of the mirror, she said, but that night, Maria Alejandrina Cervantes wouldn't let Santiago Nassar indulge himself for the last time in his tricks as a transformer, and she did it with such flimsy pretext that the bad taste left by that memory changed his life. So we took the musicians with us for a round of serenades, and we continued the party on our own. While the Vicario brothers were waiting for Santiago Nassar to kill him, it was he who got the idea almost at 4 o'clock to go up to the widower Zaius' house and sing for the newlyweds. So again, it's sort of him taunting them like with the mulatto girls as well. Would he taunt them if he had slept with Angela, or is he doing that just sort of for fun? We don't know.
Not only did we sing under the windows, but we set off rockets and fireworks in the gardens. Yet we didn't perceive any sign of life inside the farmhouse. Again, a bit of a foreshadowing there. No signs of life. It didn't occur to us that there was no one there, especially because the new car was by the door with its top still folded down and with the satin ribbons and bouquets of wax orange blossoms that they had hung on it during the festivities. My brother Luis Enrique, who played the guitar like a professional at that time, improvised a song with matrimonial double meanings in honour of the newlyweds. Until then, it hadn't rained. Again, signs of the weather, conflicting memories of what the weather was like and when is something that runs throughout this whole text. On the contrary, the moon was high in the sky and the air was clear. And at the bottom of the precipice, you could see the trickle of light from the St. Elmo's fire in the cemetery. On the other side, you could make out the groves of blue banana trees in the moonlight, and the sad swamps, and the phosphorescent line of the Caribbean on the horizon. So it's quite a sad, quite eerie image that they're painting here. Santiago Nassar pointed to an intermittent light at sea and told us that it was the soul in torment of a slave ship that had sunk with a cargo of blacks from Senegal across the main harbour mouth at Cartagena de Indias. It wasn't possible to think that his conscience was bothering him. Although at the time he didn't know that the ephemeral married life of Angela Vicario had come to an end 2 hours before. Beatrice and Roman had taken her to her parents' house on foot so that the noise of the motor wouldn't betray his misfortune in advance. So again, it's his misfortune. It's not her misfortune. She's not the victim. In these words, in this presentation, he's the victim, his misfortune in advance. And he was back there alone and with the lights out in the widower Zaius' happy farmhouse. Quite an interesting contrast there in that sentence. When we went down the hill, my brother invited us to have some breakfast of fried fish at one of the lunch stands in the market, but Santiago Nassar was against it because he wanted to get an hour's sleep before the bishop arrived. He went along the riverbank with Cristo Bedoya, passing the poor people's eating places that were beginning to light up by the old harbour, and before turning the corner, he waved goodbye. It was the last time we saw him. Cristo Bedoya, whom he'd had agreed to meet later on at the docks, took leave of him at the back door of his house. The dogs barked at him as usual when they heard him come in, but he calmed them down in the half-light with the tinkling of his keys. Victoria Guzman was keeping watch over the coffee pot on the stove when he passed by the kitchen on his way inside the house. "Whitey," she called to him, "coffee will be ready soon." Santiago Nassar told her that he'd have some later, and he asked her to tell Davina Flor to wake him up at 5:30 and bring him a clean change of clothes, just like the ones he had on. An instant after he'd gone to bed, Victoria Guzman got the message from Clotilda Mente sent via the milk beggar. At 5:30, she followed his orders to wake him, but she didn't send Davina Flor and went up to the bedroom herself with the suit of pure linen. And given the way he treated her daughter in earlier chapters, you can imagine why she went up herself. Because she never missed a chance to keep her daughter away from the claws of the seigneur. Maria Alejandrina Cervantes had left the door of the house unbarred. I took leave of my brother, crossed the veranda where the mulatto girl's cats were sleeping curled up among the tulips, and opened the bedroom door without knocking. The lights were out, but as soon as I went in, I caught the smell of a warm woman, and I saw the eyes of an insomniac leopard in the darkness. Interesting way of describing her there. And I didn't know anything else about myself until the bells began to ring. On his way to our house, my brother went in to buy some cigarettes at Clotilda's store. He'd drunk so much that his memories of that encounter were always quite confused. But he never forgot the fatal drink that Pedro Vicario offered him. It was liquid fire, he told me. Pablo Vicario, who had fallen asleep, awoke with a start when he heard him come in, and he showed him the knife. "We're going to kill Santiago Nassar," he told him. My brother doesn't remember it. But even if I did remember, I wouldn't have believed it. He told me many times. Who the fuck would ever think that the twins would kill anyone, much less with a pig knife? When they asked him where Santiago Nassar was, because they'd seen the two of them together, and my brother didn't remember his own answer either. But Clotilda Menta and the Vicario brothers were so startled when they heard it that it was left established in the brief in separate declarations. According to them, my brother said, Santiago Nassar is dead. Then he delivered an episcopal blessing, stumbled over the threshold, and staggered out. In the middle of the square, he crossed paths with Father Amador. He was going to the dock in his vestments, followed by an acolyte who was ringing the bell and several helpers carrying the altar for the bishop's field mass. The Vicario brothers crossed themselves when they saw them pass. So interesting there. They're like giving themselves the cross when they see the bishop's field mass going past, even though they're on their way to kill someone. Clotilda Menta told me that they'd lost their last hopes when the priest passed by her place. So again, she's one of the only people that have actually tried to do something to stop these brothers. She seems to want to stop them from earlier on in this chapter because she wants to protect them, not necessarily Santiago Nassar. I thought they hadn't got my message, she said. Nonetheless, Father Amador confessed to me many years later, interesting there that the father is doing the confessing, retired from the world in the gloomy Calafell rest home, that he had in fact received Clotilda Menta's message and others more peremptory when he was getting ready to go to the docks. The truth is, I didn't know what to do, he told me. My first thought that it wasn't any of the business of mine, but something for the civil authorities. But then I made up my mind to say something in passing to Placido Linero. Yet it was he who crossed the square. He'd completely forgotten. You have to understand, he told me, that the bishop was coming on that unfortunate day. So, prioritisation there, saving someone's life or receiving the bishop. At the moment of the crime, he felt such despair and was so disgusted with himself that the only thing he could think of was to ring the fire alarm. My brother Luis Enrique went into the house through the kitchen door, which my mother left unlocked so that my father wouldn't hear us come in. He went to the bathroom before going to bed, but he fell asleep on the toilet, and when my brother Jamie got up to go to school, he found him stretched out face down on the tile floor and singing in his sleep. My sister, the nun, who wasn't going to wait for the bishop because she had an 80-proof hangover, bit of a contradiction there in her profession and also her 80-proof hangover, couldn't get him to wake up. It was striking 5 when I went to the bathroom, she told me. Later, when my sister Margot went in to bathe before going to the docks, she managed with great effort to drag him to the bedroom. From the other side of sleep, he heard the first bellows of the bishop's boat, and that's always mentioned like that the bishop's boat is bellowing as it arrives, without awakening. Then he fell into a deep sleep, worn out by carousing, until my sister the nun went into the bedroom, trying to put her habit on as she ran, and woke him up with her mad cry. They've killed Santiago Nassar. Do, do, do. Okay, bye.